Hey, what's up, everybody? This is John Odermatt, your host here on Felony Friday, and I want to try something new. Don't have an ad for you here or anything like that, but I have a request. So I want to try something with Apple Podcast reviews. They're very important in podcasts, and they help you get more attention and eyeballs on your podcast. You get in the, you rank up in the categories, all that stuff. So I would like people to give 5-star reviews. So I'm going to reward people who give us 5-star reviews, review the podcast, say something nice, and then if after you do that, if you drop either a topic you'd like me to talk about, a question, and ask me anything, you can ask me a random question, and I will address it on the show if it's appropriate. But you can drop that after your 5-star rating and your review, put what you want to talk about there on the show. I will talk about it, and it helps the show. It helps you influence the show. It's a win-win. So please consider doing that. Make sure, even if you listen on Spotify or Overcast or whatever, do it on Apple Podcast. They have the most control right now, so do it there, and we'll see what happens. All right, thank you very much.
Welcome to Felony Friday, a presentation of the Lions of Liberty podcast. Here is your host, John Odermatt.
Felons, friends, and freedom lovers, welcome back to another edition of Felony Friday. It is a July 4th edition, actually July 3rd if you're listening to this on Friday, but it is 4th of July weekend, one of my favorite holidays out of the year. Mainly because I just enjoyed to relax with the family, drink some beer, and watch fireworks, which I can't watch fireworks this year because fireworks have been made illegal by COVID, because everyone knows that watching fireworks outside is the most dangerous thing you can do spreading coronavirus. Obviously, I'm kidding. It's freaking ridiculous. Anyway, I digress. I talked about during the pre-roll Apple Podcast reviews and sending those in. They've been coming in fast and furious. I want to hit on a couple of those today. I love that you guys are leaving great reviews, asking questions. I realize we're a little bit behind. I can't remember if Mark or Brian have addressed any of these, so I'm only going to address the ones that call Felony Friday out specifically. 2 of them. There's more. There's a lot more. You guys have been very, very busy giving reviews, and please continue to. But I want to talk about a couple here. So this one coming from DJ Hoffman with 7 N's roughly. Love the username. Love the show. Question/topic. I worked in the juvenile justice system in PA as a physician. He says, would love a show on that. Would be happy to talk to you about my experience as well. Well, I would be happy to hear a little bit more about your experience and a little bit more about what you'd want in a show. What I'd like you to do, DJ Hoffman, is send me an email, felonyfriday@lionsofliberty.com, with the topic of juvenile justice physician in PA, something like that. And we'll talk. We'll see what happens. I would like to do some episodes on the juvenile justice system as a whole. So I think it's a perfect opportunity, and I would love to get your insight and your advice. So moving on to the next review that I'm going to talk about. I'm going to skip one. I'm going to skip one here from username You Can't Take the Sky From Me, which he talks about working for a major utility. And I actually want to table this one. I want to talk to Mark and Brian because this one will be a good one to break down on maybe an episode of Libertarians in Living Rooms Drinking Liquor. So I'm going to save that one. I'm not going to read it now, and maybe we'll bring that up on our roundtable show. I'm going to do one more here. This one comes from a Jedi Mind Tricked 621. Subject line, straight talk, no BS. So I finally figured out how to write a review on iTunes. Of course, you have to scroll all the way down to the bottom. Anyway, just wanted to say I love the flagship show as well as ELL and Felony Friday. You guys don't pull any punches, and I appreciate that. For John's solicitation for questions for Felony Friday, what do you think would be the economic impact if we suddenly pardoned everyone that was in prison for nonviolent crimes? This as Joe Jorgensen has suggested. Specifically, do you see any potential negative impacts by releasing so many people all at once? Great question. And I've obviously thought about this in the past, but I don't have a prepared answer as I'm just reading reviews randomly during this intro here. What I would say, and first to speak as the drug war as a whole, drug decriminalization as a whole, often on Lions of Liberty, you've probably heard us talk about with some of our guests, we talk about it being like a game of Jenga. And when you're dismantling the state, I feel like the war on drugs, pulling that Jenga piece out is one of the safest pieces to pull out, having the least negative impact, I should say initial negative impact, that other things would. A lot of things, dismantling the state, dismantling welfare, things like that, you're going to have people just going nuts because they lose their welfare payments, things like that. But with the war on drugs, of course, you're going to have some job loss in the courts and in prisons, and lawyers might lose some work, things like that. And if you talk about decriminalizing drugs, drug dealers are going to lose work too, things like that. But when you talk about releasing criminals, or I should say criminals, when you talk about releasing nonviolent offenders from their prison sentence and giving them their freedom back, I don't think, I think the fear would be finding them all jobs or them being able to find work to add value to society. So I don't think there would be a negative safety hazard. Of course, there's going to be your cases here and there where people have been sort of tainted by the criminal justice system, by the prison system, and they might have actually become worse being in that system, become more violent. Maybe they went in for a nonviolent crime and prison turned them violent. So you might have some cases like that where some crimes happen of people who are released. That wouldn't surprise me at all. But I think the vast majority, because I talk to these people all the time, I think the vast majority would embrace their freedom. And the biggest thing is support. So people have family support, great, fantastic. That's one step. They have a place to live, somebody helping to get on their feet, someone to drive them to a job, things like that. But probably a lot of them aren't going to have any family support. So who fills that void? It's going to have to be the private sector. It's going to have to be charities. It's going to have to be nonprofits that step up and do this. And honestly, even aside from a place to live, a place to work, transportation, there's also just clothing to wear. You get released from prison, you have nothing. You have clothes on your back and you got a couple bucks in your pocket. That's all you got. So there need to be some programs. And I've put some thought into, ways this could be set up, and I'm not in a position to announce anything right now. And I've also talked about some things that maybe we could do at Lions of Liberty to sort of ease this burden. And I don't know if we're there yet to start putting those things together, but I would hope in the next couple of years we can be, because I do think that we are going to come to a time in this country, and I hope and I pray that we do, where all nonviolent drug offenders, all nonviolent criminals will be released. We'll have their sentences reduced and we'll get out of prison. I think society is changing. People are becoming more compassionate and understanding how broken the criminal justice system is. So I'm excited for that, and people are going to need to step up. And hopefully here at Lions of Liberty, we can be a part of that solution. And you as a listener and as a supporter on Patreon, anyone who's supporting us on Patreon, hopefully we can figure out a way for you to support us in doing this and contribute to the cause. But we're only one small part. And we haven't done anything yet. There's other organizations already doing stuff, so I don't want to take credit for something we haven't done. But there's going to need to be a huge effort of private enterprises and charities and churches stepping up to fill the void, because there's going to be a big demand for it. And entrepreneurs hiring formerly incarcerated individuals, going to need that too. So I hope that answered your question. So I guess to answer the question, yes, there would be negative impacts if people don't step up to offer charity to these individuals, because they're going to need it. And that's the state is not good at that. I'm sure my listeners here understand that. So just pushing money to a state agency to offer those services will probably end terribly. because as my guest today talks about, you'll hear my guest Rick Schwetz talk about when he was released from prison, going into a halfway house, the crazy experience that he went through. That stuff tends to happen when you give the state a bunch of money to correct people and to reintegrate them back into society. You often end up getting the cesspool of society being attracted to that money right there. So we want to avoid that at all costs. I think I've rambled long enough. I want to get to today's show. Great episode with Rick Schwetz talking about his own experience in prison, his past, his prison experience, where he is now, but also advocating for his friend Eddie McDevitt, who was in prison for accidentally killing a former police officer during a bar fight. This is a great show. Please share it around, guys. Thank you for your support. Hope you enjoy the show. My guest today on Felony Friday is Rick Schwetz. Rick actually reached out to me a few weeks ago. He wanted to advocate for his friend, Eddie Mack. Eddie is currently serving a life sentence in prison for a tragedy that essentially, from my understanding, resulted from a bar fight. So we'll get into the details about that and why Rick is so passionate about advocating for Eddie's release, for his clemency. Before we do that, we'll talk about, learn about Rick's story, learn about his past and his time in prison. So let's get started with that. Rick, welcome to Felony Friday.
Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, well, thank you for coming on the show. And whenever people reach out to me, I do get a lot of emails and people with different stories. I was honestly, when I read it and you explained what had happened with Eddie, and I think it's something that it's important on many levels. I think the focus right now on compassionate release and clemency and everything around COVID is really around nonviolent criminals, right? At least that's what I've seen. Maybe I'm wrong. But with Eddie having the violent crime, I'm interested to really talk about that case, learn more about it, learn about your friendship with him, how you guys know each other, and go from there. So, but before we get to that, so my audience can learn about you. If you could just kind of share with us, about I know you did some time in prison, a couple years. Share with us, really the run up to that, what your life was like, how that played out.
Sure. So my name is Rick. I'm originally I'm an immigrant to the country. I immigrated to the country when I was 2 years old. My mother smuggled me in, literally, left me at an orphanage, and I became a citizen when I was about 13 years old. So
wow.
I was already in the system at like 2. Mom was a little cruel on me. She left me at an orphanage. Apparently I came from Germany, which I just found out about a year ago. But when Mom left me at this orphanage, it was mostly Haitian Americans in the middle of Brooklyn, New York. So they weren't prepared for German butt. That was for sure. Nobody spoke German. Nobody knew anything about me because my mom didn't leave any information about me.
How old were you when you found that part of the story out, or did you know that growing up?
Well, I grew up in the orphanage basically from about 7. So I got adopted when I was 7 years old. So I knew a lot about me, but I didn't know much about where I came from, and nobody could explain it. Mm-hmm. There's a big void there where a lot of people know, your mom, your dad, where you're born at. I didn't even know my birth date. Like my birth date wasn't really technically my birth date. I was celebrating the wrong birth date, the wrong year for my life. I was actually a couple years older than what I thought I was, which sort of explains I was always struggling in school. But about 13 years old, I became a citizen. I got myself legalized, but I was already, experienced the system in some aspects. Being through from 2 to 7, you're in a different type of foster care because you don't have paperwork. You're not a legal citizen, so you can't be adopted out. You couldn't go to the regular foster placements. You had to go to some of the not so nice establishments. So it gave me a good experience from that age of what it was like to be institutionalized. So when I got out when I was 7, I didn't last long with the adopted family. I emancipated myself when I was 15, just because we just couldn't get along. I was already broken when I showed up at their doorstep, so it wasn't much they could do. And those times were different, where people didn't understand the psychology of a child sitting in an orphanage from another country. I started obviously at 15, being in New York City. The way to survive was to sort of run the streets. There was only one way to really survive at that age. It was either run the streets or get run over. So that's when I started to live in the criminal aspect of things where, crime it was never really something that bothered me because of the environment that I had grown up in. So I was sterile to it didn't bother me going out and, breaking into cars or stealing stuff from stores and stuff of that nature. And that led me down my path to when was in my mid-20s in Pennsylvania, down here in Allentown, Pennsylvania, and a friend of mine that I was running with had sold some narcotics to a police officer apparently previously. The police showed up with a no narc warrant and they kicked the door down. I was in the apartment at the time. I didn't live there. I didn't sell anything to the cops. The cops didn't even know me, but I was there in that apartment when it got raided. So they wanted to charge me with a conspiracy. My friend that sold to the cops got out in 6 months, and I wound up getting originally 10 years, which then got appealed down to 5.
So how did that happen? So were the cops, they weren't expecting you to be there? Were you on their radar, or was it just like...
Look, I'm not going to pull any punches. My karma is a real mother, and I was doing lots of bad things at the time in Allentown, and as being a white kid from New York that's running around Pennsylvania in the ghetto, I was obviously my face was known enough, but they charged me with a conspiracy, and they realized I didn't have the attorney to fight it. I had a little bit of a juvenile history, and that sort of buried me. So I had to take the plea that was offered. Originally, it was 10 years. They were going to charge us all with the RICO Act originally. Like, dude, it was 3 grams of cocaine. Yes, sir. Look it up.
God.
So 1994 is when they charged me. 1995 is when they caught me because I did take off. Once I knew that I was in deep trouble, I bailed out. I took off a little bit, made my life worse, made my case worse by fleeing. They finally caught up with me in 95. They sentenced me to a total of 5 years then. I wound up getting out in 2000.
Where did you serve your time then?
See, this is the old school stretch. So 94, you got to remember, was right after the Camp Hill riots. And that's where everybody had to go. Everybody through the whole state had to go through Camp Hill. Graterford on one side, or it was another place in Pittsburgh on the other. But then you had to go through Camp Hill, and then you got sent to your prison. So I went through Graterford for a couple of weeks. Totally terrifying. I mean, the biggest steel gates you ever saw. Guards and inmates screaming at you. I remember walking into Graterford. And this is a guy that had no experience in any state prison whatsoever.
How old were you at this point in time?
Maybe 24, 25, somewhere around. Kid, too young to know better. I meet this nurse, and a nurse, it looks nice. So I'm like, yeah, we all have to go to the nurse to get our blood done and stuff like that. So I'm waiting actually because I'm like, wow, a nice face. Everything else in here is terrifying. I'm waiting to go and get my Browns. And this nurse sits me down. She has a guard grab me by my arm. They hold my arm down. She stabs me like it's a knife with a hypodermic needle to get my blood. And then she asks me as she's drawing my blood, she's like, where do you want your body sent? And I'm like, excuse me? She's like, where do you want your body sent when you're dead? We got to know what you want to have it buried here on grounds. You want to have it, your family going to pick you up because you're not going to make it past today. That's what she said to me.
What?
So I'm ready to poop my pants, dude. I'm from New York. I'm here. So she got me good. What the cause of that was she was trying to wake me up because I'm laughing, giggling. I got my street clothes on, we're hanging out with the homies in the bullpen, and she's literally looking at me thinking, dude, you don't have any idea what you're walking into right now. And it was literally the most terrifying experience of my entire life. How I survived it, I don't know. I can't tell you today how I survived it, but I did.
So you did all told 5 years, you said?
Yeah, I got a sentence originally. The judge, when she sentenced me, she said, you know what, you're from New York, you're down here in Allentown, you're causing trouble, so I'm going to give you the maximum sentence possible, which was 5 to 10 years. On the conspiracy, it was 2 different conspiracy charges. I got the one conspiracy charge dismissed, and the other one I got it appealed down, and I wound up getting a 2.5 to 5 year sentence, which I wound up doing. I only had a few months left by the time they let me go. They gave me a couple months of parole out of Frackville. That's where I wound up doing the majority of my time was in Frackville.
So I want to come back to when you met Eddie, but before I do that, just to finish out your story, kind of. So when did you? Because obviously you seem like you've turned your life around now. So when did that happen? Was that while you were in prison, after you got out, or?
Yeah, I tell this story to my children because I don't hold things back from anybody, and anybody that asks me, I tell this story too. It was in Camp Hill. Like I said, it was after the riots, so the guards were understandably violent. They had experienced many things in the Camp Hill riots that people don't want to talk about. Nurses and guards being raped and other inmates raping other inmates. It was hell. Oh, I was in right a couple years afterwards. I got in trouble in the kitchen. They take me to the hole. I figure, they're going to lock me in a cell for a couple of days. As soon as I go into the hole, this big, massive captain, this guy was like 6'8", huge, grabs me by my shirt. They pull me in. I'm handcuffed from behind, and they just start beating me. I've never got a beating like that ever. And I've been beaten, but I never got beat like that. So they drag my bloody corpse into a cell in Camp Hill in the hole, and they left me naked. They left me hogtied. They sprayed me down with a freezing cold water hose, and then they opened up the windows in the middle of the winter and turned the air conditioner on and left me like that for 2 days. I got no food, no water. My ribs are broken for sure. All my fingers were broke. I could feel that because they stepped on them with boots when I kept trying to get my balance. And I remember praying, and I said, you know what? I've made a lot of foxhole prayers in my life. I'll change this. I'll change that. I swear to goodness. But I got a response back. And, I don't know if it was just because I was on the verge of death, or it was because I was at that desperation where I finally got to hear it. And I got to hear a response back. If you turn that thing around, if you walk out of here and you do what you promised me, I promise you that you'll live a prosperous life. And, not just a summary of what was being said. Obviously, it was a deeper conversation, but that was the moment where I decided that I can either let this break me. I'm obviously a terrible drug dealer. I'm obviously a terrible criminal. Here I am sitting doing 5 years. Like, I wasn't very good. Or I can turn around and use this experience to that God's given me one more chance. Maybe he saved my life by putting me in prison. It probably saved my life. So that's what I did. I turned, ever since that point, I went to college classes. I educated myself. I used the time to correct. That's the part they keep forgetting. It's a correctional system.
That's what it's supposed to be. Yeah.
Right. So we had to self-correct ourselves. And there is a group of people in there that were about that. We're going to try and say, you know what? I may never get out of this prison, but I'm going to live vicariously through you. So I use those type of people, those tutors and those mentors in prison to get me to the point where I am now. Like, it was a miracle. Literally, it was a miracle.
That's great. That's an incredible story.
Thank you.
So let's turn back and talk about Eddie Mack. So is that his full name, Eddie Mack, or is that
his name is Eddie McDevitt, Edward McDevitt.
Okay.
His DC number AM 9709. Yeah, that's it. And it's sad that I know that off the top of my head because that man was also a part of saving my life. As I got close to getting out of Frackville, I got a parole date finally. And I didn't really care that much because I had been there for so long. I only had a few months. I didn't have anywhere to go. So, like, what did I care? You know what I mean? Like, nobody waiting for me. So I got in a fight with the Muslim Brotherhood, the leader, the imam of the Muslim Brotherhood in Frackville. And that's pretty much a death sentence. Like, those guys are obviously deeply embedded in the prison system. And they put a contract on me, and they wanted me dead in the yard. And Eddie Mack went and squashed that, literally put his own neck on the line, knowing that he has to spend the rest of his life with these people. I'm leaving. But he did it because we became such close friends. And, I spent probably the entire 3 years that I was up in Frackville getting to know Eddie McDevitt as a person. And it's one of the few people that you meet that will own the entire portion of his case. No, it was this guy's fault. Or if this wasn't this, then this would have happened. Like, you always hear that, I'm innocent, million innocent people up there. Very few people will ever just own it completely and take full responsibility for it. And I did. But when you pull up his case law, you see what happened to Eddie, and it's shocking that it just happened.
So what is Eddie's background? Can you take us through his case? And he has a life sentence, but
right.
How did he end up there?
Eddie McDevitt, in 1983, when I was 9 years old, went to a bar around the corner from his home. It was a regular pub that he usually visited, and he had some grievances. He was a little, tough guy from South Philly. Like, he liked to, run his mouth a little bit, like any other kid did. So apparently Eddie's father and his off-duty police officer had some issues that Eddie wasn't quite aware of, but Eddie knew the guy didn't like him. They didn't like each other. They go to a bar, they get drunk. One guy invites Eddie out, or Eddie invites the guy out, who knows, to go outside and fight. And that's what everybody says, literally in every single witness report. So he goes outside with this guy. They get into a physical fight. Guy winds up falling backwards, splits his skull open on a step, and Eddie gives him a little bit of a 1-2 while he's laying on the ground. So Eddie gets arrested because the guy winds up going. He went into a coma first, and then he died. Eddie got arrested for it. Originally, he got charged with a manslaughter and $2,000 bail. When it was discovered that he was an off-duty former police officer, they changed the entire charge to first-degree murder. They originally tried to put him on death row, and he wound up getting a life sentence out of it. That was back in 1983.
Hey everybody, taking a quick break here from the show. Wanted to remind you all to check out my man Tyler Colford, aka Crypto Man, and his new song Free Ross. If you didn't hear my recent interview with Lynn Ulbricht, that was Felony Friday episode 230. Interviewed Lynn Ulbricht, played Tyler's song Free Ross. It's fantastic, phenomenal. Not just for the message of freeing Ross Ulbricht, but overall for changing the broken criminal justice system. All the proceeds from the Free Ross song, hashtag Free Ross by Crypto Man. You can find it on Spotify and Amazon Music. 100% of the proceeds from the song, hashtag Free Ross by Crypto Man, go towards freeing Ross Ulbricht. So please check it out.
These are perilous times when they ruin your lives over victimless crimes, and they sever your ties from your business, loved ones, and family. Why? New slave labor, they barely pay you. Don't care about work ethic or major.
So they changed it so they didn't know at the fact that this was an off-duty, or not off-duty, I guess retired police officer or something,
right?
Former police officer. And then when they found that out, they completely changed the charging?
Well, it wasn't that I believe that the responding officers, if you look at the court documentation, because one thing that prison's great for is a law library. You can pull up anybody's case, especially if somebody who's been there that long. You can pull up every detail. Mm-hmm. So I did. And the responding officers knew that was a police officer, was in his wallet. It wasn't like he didn't have identification on him, but they also knew it was a bar fight. So they charged him accordingly. It was a bar fight. The guy got his ass. He wound up, dying off of it. But it wasn't intentional, obviously. He had no intent of walking in there and killing this man. So eventually, I guess the district attorney's office down in Philadelphia decided that that's not good enough. They're going to make him an example in the mid-'80s, and they charged him with first-degree capital murder. So they sought the death penalty.
Jesus.
Yeah. So years later, still waiting for somebody to say, "Oops, sorry."
So when you met Eddie in prison, what was his, what's his feeling about serving his life in prison? I mean, how's he dealing with that?
It's literally right in front of me right now. This is a letter from Eddie McDevitt, and I have hundreds of these, and I can show you what happens with Eddie, and I watched it happen while I was there. Eddie needs somebody to keep him grounded, or else the pure anger and he had no acceptance on this life sentence. He still believes that he should be free, and he refuses to admit that he's going to die inside prison. Mm-hmm. So it's a very, very difficult person to be able to even communicate with, because you don't know where he is that day. And this guy, we used to do track we used to do yard in the summer. It was 2.5 hour shots. At one time, you go out for 2.5 hours. This guy would sprint full Forrest Gump style, that track for 2.5 hours. Only time he'd ever stop is grab a drink, go right back to the track and do it again. There was that much built up inside him. Mm-hmm. Massive, humongous person that is literally trying to contain this beast, so he doesn't give him justification to keep him in there. He has not caught any new charges. He has not done anything you're talking about 36 years in prison, and he's pretty much been a stand-up model prisoner for the most part, minus incidents, obviously.
Mm-hmm. So what is the path to him getting clemency? Is there assume there's no appeals left, or?
Right. The appeals have been squashed and squandered. There's no appeals left. He has two options left. He can apply for commutation through the governor's office, or he applies for commutation from the president. So those two things is what we're pursuing, because he could write a letter on obviously some weird looking paper and send it off to the governor's office, and it'll be disposed of in the filing cabinet labeled trash bin, where we could be able to write out a proper letter trying to get support from his own community, from people that would be, people that you wouldn't expect him to support, people that would not be expected to support him. Mm-hmm. So there's an officer that I know that owns a bar. I'm not going to drop his name just because, this is something that maybe the other officers would frown upon, but he's going to write a letter of commutation, a letter of recommendation for commutation to Eddie. And that's a police officer that, this is a charge of an officer being killed at the hands of somebody. So it's very powerful to hear that a police officer that read the case file originally said, no, I'll never write that letter for you, Rick. Came back to me and said, you know what, after I read his file, I totally agree that he's already served his time. His time has been served. He should have been home 25 years ago at the tops. The maximum at that time was 7 to 14 years for manslaughter, first degree. So at worst case scenario, he should have been gone 22 years ago.
Yeah, he served the sentence more than twice. That's ridiculous. When you think about it, being like, when I think about growing up and, when I was younger, going to bars, getting rowdy, something like that, it could happen to anybody.
Happens all the time.
Yeah,
it does. It's accidental. People have accidents on a constant basis, and we live with those regrets, obviously. And Eddie is super regretful. The family of the police officer has already
forgave him 20 years ago because he just kept writing letters over and over again saying, look, I never had any intent, no matter what the newspaper said. I never intended on doing it. But there's another issue there for Eddie. And the other issue is that what if we do get him out? What happens? His family's gone. He has nothing. It's 36 years ago. His dad's dying in a nursing home. His brother has been off, and he has nothing else left. And just mentally, how do we get him back in society and expect him ever to be the same again? There is no Eddie McDevitt from 1983. That guy's dead. And who's responsible then to care for this guy and put him back together again? That's the other part that we're pushing hard to get him out. But at the same time, unfortunately, it's sad to say the only life he knows is behind those walls. He knows nothing about. He only spent 10 years free. So
that's really, an indictment of the system. There's so many guys like that in the system that, on all kinds of different charges, on nonviolent drug charges. I just had Rufus Rochelle, who actually the show's airing today. We're recording this on a Friday, but he did 32 years in prison for, and it was there was no actual drugs found. It was all ghost dope, just people testifying against them to get their sentences reduced so they could get their own freedom. And
32 years for drugs.
Yeah, 32 years for drugs. They didn't even find any drugs. It's just all hearsay. It's completely ridiculous. And he comes out, and he's an older guy now. And you know what are you supposed to do? How do you?
Right.
It's an insane system, and that's one of the main reasons I do this show. I'm just trying to get people to wake up, and it's a small little corner of the internet, but just trying to get people to wake up.
Please. Now I do a little bit of work. Like my buddy Frank came home last year, and before he came home, we were working with him trying to adjust. He did 11 years in. I just met a guy down in South Philly. He did 30 years in. He knew Eddie Mack, actually. They grew up together. He showed me pictures. I didn't even know this guy from a can of paint. I just saw him the other day at that protest I was telling you about. Just that's how God works. Some guy that's got life on parole and did 30 years in prison knew Eddie McDevitt. They grew up together. And he's even shocked. He's like, what do you mean Eddie's still in? He's like, I thought he was out and moved to Florida. But it's another one where nobody was there for him, and he almost put himself right back in 30 years of prison time. And they're supposed, hey, have a great day. Here's your box of stuff. Walk out there and don't violate your parole. How do you do that? Where are we as a society that we don't recognize that part of it has to be addressed? There's massive opportunity to stop people going back in if we just get them at that point where they're looking for the most help they can possibly take is at that time when they walk out of prison and they really don't ever want to go back there ever again. Nobody ever says, oh shit, I want to go back in. No, it doesn't happen.
Yeah. And they have that taste of freedom. And what do I do now? They don't have a driver's license. They don't have clothes. Don't have a place to stay.
Do you want me to tell you what happened to me when I got out of prison? I'll give you a real life.
Yeah.
There's a halfway house in Walnut Street in Reading, Pennsylvania that used to be run by a guy named Bill Tillman. Bill Tillman had the place run by a guy named Wade Phillips. Bill Tillman was a complete junkie. Everybody knew that. I knew him back in the day because when I used to run the streets of Reading, he was definitely one of the customers. He was just a really tall white guy with a big, like, he looked like a roll-on deodorant. Exactly what he looked like. So everybody, you definitely knew Bill Tillman, right? It's literally, if you could put a roll-on deodorant and put a face on it, that was Bill Tillman. White as a ghost.
That's the most ridiculous analogy ever.
Thank you very much. This is me. I'm a cartoonist too. So, and then we had Wade Phillips, who was the director of the halfway house. Wade Phillips was a convicted sex offender that we did time with. We knew that because he was locked up in protective custody. We knew who Wade Phillips was. He was my director of programming when I walk into my halfway house. The rest of the people that were junkies and sex offenders. I had a guy when I would go back from work. You had to take a urine test, usually randomly, but at least 3 times a week. And the guy that would take my urine test would try and offer to hold my junk while I took the urine test. Used to follow me every time I go to work, would offer me $20 if he could give me oral sex. And then he would tell if I said anything, he'd call my parole officer and have me violated. The very last day I leave the halfway house after working for 3 months at a crappy ass job and saving all my money in a bank account because we weren't allowed to have the money. Wade Phillips hands me my bank account and shows I have $1 left in there. They drained the rest of it, took it. And he's like, what are you going to do about it? You're a state prisoner. I'll just violate you and send you back. And I literally went across the desk on him. I punched him dead in his mouth. I waited for my state parole officer to come back and charge me. My state parole officer was like, look, my state parole officer wrote me a check for $200 so I could get a room and stay somewhere because he knew exactly what that halfway house is about. And he's like, man, I'm so sorry that you had to experience that. And he's like, I'm not going to charge you for punching that guy in the face. Like, don't do it anymore. But yeah, it was just, that shows you, even after you get out, after that point where you get that taste of freedom, it's all entrapment. It's all just set up it's a revolving door that they need you back in there because everything is financial guarantees.
Yeah, and you get people like the people you just mentioned leeching off the system and just hanging on and
using it.
Yeah.
What they really do is that they send these guys back to prison immediately. These guys go back, and then they may never ever come back out again. They may never be the same. People that had an opportunity once to the halfway house experienced that. Whose fault is that then? That's these guys' fault. They get their price, and they got to go out to something like that. Like, there's a lot of pitfalls in the system that definitely need to be addressed. That's for sure.
Yeah, I don't know how they fix it. I mean, it's good. There's been sentencing reform a little bit with the First Step Act. There's still a lot of people in prison right now who shouldn't be in prison, as we were just talking about. But that last piece, I mean, if the government can't handle incarcerating people in a way that doesn't, prisons are a disaster right now. Horrible conditions. You got outbreaks of what is it down in Florida? In Florida prison down there, outbreak of I don't know, something ridiculous, Legionnaire's disease or something like that.
Oh, great! Like the bubonic plague again.
Yeah,
awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. Things that they're not being that could be prevented, easily prevented. And they were treated as human beings, but we're not. We're not treated like humans. We're the lowest form of life.
Yeah.
Literally.
Yeah. So I don't know what the answer is. I mean, probably getting the private sector more involved with that transition, because a lot of people when they come out, they want to work, they're ready to work, they need an opportunity, and there's companies out there that'll give felons opportunities.
Of course, that's what I do for a living. I handle people's payrolls and their corporate taxes, and there's incentives to hire a felon. They'll take money off your federal taxes the next year when you submit it. Instead of owing money, you might get money back just for hiring. Absolutely. It's an incentive. It's in this state in Pennsylvania. The last time I remember was $4,500 in a credit that they get off their federal taxes. Look, this is what I do for a living. You ask any CPA in Pennsylvania, single mothers, people that are in situations where they were out of work for a while, veterans, they get money off their federal taxes. But absolutely, hiring a felon is a big part of that President Trump's program to try and get people incentivized to hire people. I'm going to give you back on your federal taxes.
That's good. I did not know that. Wow.
Yeah, and the other part, you hit the nail on the head. Like, we got to incentivize everyone. I get sentenced and then I get out. Like, give me an incentive not to repeat, because right now there isn't much incentive for people. Like, there's no light at the end of the tunnel. My felony is going to be on my record for the rest of my life. I can never own a firearm. Some states you can never vote again. Like, there's a lot of things that they should incentivize it. If I go 7 years, drop that felony off so I don't have to answer that question on an application anymore. I don't want to have to answer the question anymore. I do.
Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts on owning a firearm for felons? I mean, my perspective, if you're going to trust someone to come back out into society, Obviously, there's ways to obtain a firearm illegally. So if somebody wanted to do that, they could. And if you're giving someone back their freedom, saying, here's your freedom, you can get a job, you can start a family, but you can't protect them. You can't protect your own life, your own property. It's
preaching me, bro. I got 4 kids underneath this roof right now. And I won't tell you exactly what happens underneath my roof, but I'll tell you that we're protected for sure. I think that it should be something that if me as an ex-con is making the application for a gun permit and I'm going out and purchasing the gun from a legal store, then obviously I'm doing all the legal things because I know exactly how to get a gun illegally that you would never know about it. So that shouldn't be the thing that sends a red flag off. That should be the thing that sends, hey, that's a great look at that. That guy used to be an ex-con, and here he is applying for his gun permit so he can protect his family, carrying his concealed weapon. I'm putting myself on the record as saying I have these things.
Right.
Would you rather be off the record with a felony? I mean, which way you want it? Like, it doesn't make much sense. What are you asking for?
That's craziness.
That's silly.
Anyway, Rick, it's been great getting to talk with you and hearing about Eddie and getting his name out there. Because that's the first step. More people hearing about his case, and so others, because there's a big community of people pushing for clemency, and especially right now with COVID. So, anything else you want to say about Eddie's case, or anything else? Anything you want to plug or anything like that?
I just want to say that, honestly, for somebody like you, I appreciate what you're doing, because that kind of work is imperative. To hear what you think is a small voice is not, because obviously here I am. I heard about you. People in my chapter, people like my drinking club, they heard about you too. And I really do appreciate the work that you're doing, bro. And if there's anything that we can offer, if you want to be able to speak to these guys face to face, the guys that are doing time in prison, that I can offer that connection to you because of what I do for that Pennsylvania Alliance for Justice and Reform. That's my nonprofit that we run to help longtime prisoners. I didn't want to look for a plug, to be perfectly honest with you, because that's what it's about. But I encourage other people to do the same thing I'm doing. If you know somebody did a stretch of time, don't just welcome them with a bunch of balloons. Like, you want to talk to them 6 months before they get out. Show them how to shape the jail lingo, how to tie, how to do a resume before they walk out the door. Get them prepared, do your part. Like, everybody does their part. I think we can make a big difference.
All right, Rick, thanks for coming on the show. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, young man. God bless.
Thank you for listening to today's show. Another great episode of Felony Friday. As you know, Felony Friday is one of 3 shows we have here on the Lions of Liberty podcast. Of course, we kick off every single week with our Monday show hosted by Mark Claire. It's our longest running program, our flagship program, where Mark interviews leaders in the Liberty movement. Every Wednesday, we have Electric Liberty Land, hosted by Brian McWilliams. It's your weekly shot of culture, comedy, liberty, swearing, and just good fun. Check that out. You can get all 3 shows by subscribing for the great price of $0 per month. You get everything that we have here. So please check everything out. And if you like it all, please consider supporting what we're doing here at Lions of Liberty. A great way to do that is by joining the Lions of Liberty Pride. You can do that by going to patreon.com/Lions of Liberty. Another great way of doing that is by following, liking, sharing our stuff on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter. You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/Lions of Liberty. On Instagram and Twitter, we are at Lions of Liberty. And the discussion forum, where all the greatest and brightest minds go to talk about politics, liberty, everything that's happening in the world today, current events, the Lions of Liberty Forum on Facebook, which you can find by typing Lions of Liberty Forum in the search bar at the top of Facebook, clicking search, comes up, say you want to join it, answer a question, bam, you're in, and the rest is just going to be a great journey for you. So check that out. That's all I have for today. This is John Odermatt signing off. Always remember to keep your head up and the fires of liberty burning.